Hi folks, I'm coming to you from my car once again. Today I've been on the road heading up to Pennsylvania to the Golden Age Air Museum. Last year I told you about the old Rhinebeck Aerodrome. Well, this place is very similar. It's just sort of a field of dreams for people who like old airplanes. The only big difference is that Golden Age doesn't quite have the legacy that Rhinebeck does, but this place is still pretty cool. I'm up here for the weekend for a World War I fly-in. We've got at least 3 rotary engine airplanes on site, if not 4, and then Golden Age has an original Flying Curtiss Jenny. They've got a Sopwith Pup replica. They're building a Spad replica. This place is just fantastic. But I'm about to walk in here. Just pulled up. I got to get out of the car because I've been on the road for 8 hours now, and I need to get out and walk around. But I'm going to go in and say hello to some friends and look around. I already see some triplanes sitting on the field. It's pretty neat to see those. So come on in and I'll show you what we're looking at. That's something you don't see every day, folks. 3 triplanes, 2 of them with rotary engines, and just to our left is the old Rhinebeck Aerodrome Sopwith Pup, also with a rotary engine. We're going to see those things fly this weekend. Okay, show pilot extraordinaire Andrew King. Tell us a little bit about the Fokker Triplane, what it's like to fly one, a little bit about the history. I'm just going to let you talk for a second, buddy.
All right. Well, what we got here is a replica 1917 Fokker Triplane, 1917 design. I think most of them were built in 17, maybe some in 18. They came into use in the German Air Service in 1917, fall of 1917. The biggest numbers, I think, were the spring of 1918 at the front. But it's a product of the Fokker company. Anthony Fokker, well-known personality, and before World War I, during World War I, even after World War I. He'd like to take credit for a lot of the stuff. There was other people involved. Reinhold Platz was involved, I think, in the design. There's a lot of debate about who actually designed the Fokker designs. But Fokker was a pioneer in some of the structural areas and some of the aerodynamic areas. Structurally, if you look at the airplane, you see there's no bracing wires. The wings are all cantilever. They're one-piece wings, tip to tip. They go through the fuselage. One bolt, the middle wing bolts on top of the fuselage, the lower wing bolts on the bottom of the fuselage, and of course the top wing supported by cabanes. But they're cantilever wings, which is very unusual for 1917, 1918. They supposedly don't even need the wing struts out of the tips because the wings are stiff enough that they flex a little bit, and the pilots supposedly didn't like it, so they put the struts out there just to help with that. But so the wings, they have big double box bars going tip to tip is the main basis of the wing, and then plywood ribs to form the airfoil, and the ribs are sort of conventional. The big double box bars are, again, kind of unusual for that era to make the wings cantilever. And then the fuselage is also structurally unique for the time period. Fokker was a pioneer in welded steel tube structures. So the fuselage is a welded steel tube truss. It's basically a Pratt truss with a top and a bottom piece, although made in 4 sides, and then cross members in it and diagonal bracing, which is basically what they called a Pratt truss back then. They use wire bracing in each bay, so there's steel tube verticals, steel tube longerons going the length of the fuselage, steel tube verticals and horizontals, and then cross wire bracing in between, so everything is triangulated. But that was a very quick way to build a fuselage, very simple, very strong, compared to the Allied airplanes. The Newports and the Sopwiths have hundreds of wooden pieces and turnbuckles and steel fittings, and very, very, very labor intensive. So it's one of the reasons that Fokker triplanes are one of the most common replicas, are because they are much easier to build than almost any other World War I replica. So it's a famous airplane because of the Red Baron, really. They built 300 of them, so there were a lot more. I think there was 5,000 Sopwith Camels and 5,000 SE5s, and I don't know how many Fokker D7s, probably several thousand albatrosses on the German side. But the Fokker Triplane, of course, became famous because of the Red Baron and was really popularized in the 60s by Charles Schulz and Snoopy. And the Red Baron was one of the things that really popularized World War I aviation history and that particular part of it. And so one of the things that kind of drives me nuts and my peers is there's been who knows how many replica Fokker Triplanes built, 50, 60, 80, I don't know, but probably half of them are painted all red. Everybody wants to be the Red Baron, and oh, I hate red Fokker Triplanes, all red Fokker Triplanes. So here we've got 3 on the line here now, and then a 4th one coming, and they're all, the middle one to my right here is in the colors of one of the ones that von Richthofen flew. Another one, the Red Baron, von Richthofen. Another thing that people don't know is most of his airplanes were not all red. Most of them just had red parts, like the red tail, the red top wing. The whole squadron had these red noses on it. And the other interesting thing about this airplane we're standing in front of course, it's painted in the colors of Manfred von Richthofen's brother Lothar, who's, I believe, is a younger brother, but all of the squadron had red noses, red wheels, red struts, and then they would use different colors on the tail to differentiate between the different pilots. And you could tell in combat, if you saw the yellow tail, you knew that was Lothar. And you saw the red tail, you knew that was Manfred, and there was other pilots with different colors and different stripes and things. So that's the explanation of the colors. One of the interesting thing about 3 of the Fokker triplanes here is that the rotary engine, where the entire engine, if you can see, spins with the propeller. It was the engine is entirely machined. The cylinder started out as 70-pound blocks of steel, and I think they weigh something like 8 pounds now. They were machined down, but they couldn't machine big enough cooling fins to get adequate cooling. And somebody came up with a bright idea. Well, if we spin the whole engine, it'll cool itself. And so that, as far as I know, is the reason for the spinning engine, which of course created all kinds of other problems. How to get the fuel and air mixture in through the engine. The crankshaft is bolted to the airplane, so the engine spins around the crankshaft instead of the other way on a normal engine. But so the crankshaft is hollow, the fuel and the oil and the air come in through the hollow crankshaft. These tubes in the side are the air intakes, and they go in kind of above your feet in the cockpit and then in through the back of the crankshaft. But then you also, of course, have 350 pounds of steel spinning in front of you, which creates some gyroscopic force and affects the flying qualities of the airplane. But it's very typical. It's a 600-something cubic inch engine, 660 cubes or something like that, which is a very large engine for only 80 horsepower, but it's a very high torque engine, turns a giant propeller at a slow speed. I think the red line is 1,250 RPM, something like that. So it's a slow-turning, high torque, big cubic inch, relatively low horsepower engine. And that's was very typical of a lot of World War I airplanes, especially the Allies. The Germans didn't use the rotary engine so much; they tended to favor inline engines. But the Fokker triplanes, I think one of the things that gave Fokker little advantage with the triplane was the rotary engines were available because the Germans didn't tend to use them, so they had stockpiles of them, I think. But that's kind of the story of the Fokker triplane. It kind of was a short-lived thing. It started in the fall of 18, went into the fall of 1917, went into the spring of 1918. But one of the things about it was with 3 wings, of course, it's very maneuverable and can turn very tight, but it also has a lot of drag and you can't run away. And air combat eventually evolved to sort of a hit and run thing where you try to get height on your adversary, dive down on them, shoot at them, and either keep going or zoom up and get away. And the triplane wasn't good for getting away from a fight. And so eventually in the spring of 1918, they had to go to faster airplanes like the Fokker D7. But for a short time, it had a very good reputation as a very good dogfighting airplane, and the Allies very much respected the Fokker triplanes, and they tended to go to the better pilots also, and that kind of segues into the flying qualities of it. The people ask me a lot about what it's like flying a Fokker triplane, and I always tell them, well, it's not really fun, but I enjoy it. Because it's very unstable. There's no dihedral on the wings. They're dead flat. There's no vertical fin to help stabilize in front of the rudder. It's just the rudder working by itself. It's very short. They tend to be tail heavy, which makes them more unstable. I think Fokker understood that the more unstable an airplane was, the more maneuverable it is, and so they kind of went over the edge on instability, which made it that much more maneuverable. And so you had to have a good pilot to fly it. they really, in the air, it's not that bad to fly. You have to stay on it all the time. But one of the biggest dynamics of the Fokker Triplane is when you land and the tail goes down, the middle wing goes above the horizon. And so you sort of can't see anything from wingtip to wingtip. And that is what really makes it hard to fly as a landing. There's little cutouts next to the cockpit on the center wing. And you can kind of lean down and try to look out those cutouts, which is what I do when the tail comes down. But it's still, not being able to see out of it is one of the biggest dynamics when the tail is down when you're landing is what makes it really hard to land. And the airplanes here with rotary engines, they have the authentic tail skid on it. The airplane that I was flying, the red-tailed one here, the Manfred airplane, is a little bit modernized, where it has a modern engine, a Lycoming engine. It has brakes on the wheels, and it has a wheel in the back, a tail wheel instead of a tail skid in the back that's steerable. So I can land it on pavement. I landed it on pavement coming up today, but it's still a little tricky to land, especially on the pavement. So that's kind of the story of the Fokker Triplane, and having 4 of them on one airport. There's a museum in Virginia that I think has 4. I've never seen a picture of the 4 of them together. In New Zealand, at Omaka, they have, I think, 6 or 7. That's kind of the triplane capital of the world. But as far as the United States, having 4 Fokker triplanes in one spot is almost unique ever. So it's an interesting event we've got going on this weekend, and we should have a lot of fun.